Michael Chen had only meant to catch the red-eye to Portland, but when he noticed a woman crying alone at gate 47, clutching a crumpled legal document and staring at a departure board through tears, something in her desperation reminded him of his own darkest moments. What happened next wasn't planned. It wasn't heroic, it was simply human, and sometimes the smallest acts of compassion unlock the most extraordinary twists of fate. If you believe in unexpected connections, second chances, and the mysterious ways life weaves our stories together, this one's for you. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you: the fluorescent lights of Denver International Airport. Hummed overhead as Michael Chen dragged his worn duffel bag across the polished floor, his work boots squeaking against the tile with each exhausted step. The clock above the departure gate read 11:47 p.m. and his flight to Portland wasn't boarding for another 20 minutes. 20 minutes to sit, to breathe, to pretend that flying across the country to take a construction job he didn't want was somehow going to solve the mounting pile of problems waiting for him back home. Michael found an empty row of plastic chairs and collapsed into one, letting his bag drop with a thud that echoed in the nearly deserted terminal. His phone buzzed with another text from his landlord, the third one today, each message a little less patient than the last. Rent was due 4 days ago. The electricity bill sat unopened on his kitchen counter. And somewhere in Chicago, his 8-year-old daughter Emma was probably lying awake, wondering why Daddy had to work so far away just to keep their tiny apartment. He rubbed his eyes with calloused hands, the kind of hands that spoke of years spent framing houses and pouring concrete, of honest work that somehow never seemed to pay enough. 3 months ago, when the construction company in Denver had offered him steady work, it seemed like the answer to everything. Good pay, reliable hours, a chance to get ahead. What they didn't mention was how the cost of living would eat through his paycheck, how the promised overtime would never materialize, how he'd end up broker than when he started. Now he was heading to Portland because a friend of a friend knew a contractor who needed experienced framers. And Michael had learned that hope was sometimes just another word for desperation dressed up in work clothes. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to Emma's contact, thumb hovering over the call button. She'd be asleep by now, curled up in the bed they'd picked out together at the thrift store, the one with the squeaky springs and the faded princess sheets she'd insisted on, even though she claimed she was too old for princesses. Michael had been 17 when Emma came into his life, not much more than a kid himself, working part-time at a hardware store while trying to finish high school. Emma's mother, Sarah, had been his first real relationship, and when she told him she was pregnant, the world had shifted on its axis in a way that both terrified and completed him. They'd tried to make it work, really tried, but Sarah had dreams that didn't include sleepless nights and grocery store formula, dreams that led her to a marketing job in Seattle and a new life that had no room for the family they'd created. The divorce papers had been signed when Emma was 3, and Michael had fought for primary custody not because he had any idea what he was doing, but because he couldn't imagine his life without his daughter's laugh echoing through their small apartment. Sarah sent child support when she could, birthday cards that arrived a week late, and Christmas presents ordered online and shipped directly from Amazon with no return address. Emma had stopped asking when Mommy was coming to visit sometime around her 6th birthday. Across the terminal, Michael noticed a woman sitting alone at gate 47, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. She looked to be in her early 30s, dressed in a black business suit that had seen better days, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that was coming undone. In her hands, she clutched what appeared to be a legal document, the white pages wrinkled from her grip. Every few seconds, she'd look up at the departure board, then back down at the papers, as if hoping the words would somehow change. Michael, watched her for a moment, recognizing something familiar in her posture. It was the same way he'd sat in family court 3 years ago when the judge had explained that despite his best efforts, child support calculations didn't care about good intentions or how much you loved your kid. It was the posture of someone who'd run out of options, who was staring at a future that looked nothing like the life they'd planned. He looked away, telling himself it wasn't his business. He had enough problems of his own, and getting involved in a stranger's crisis was the last thing he needed. But something about the woman's quiet desperation gnawed at him. Maybe it was the way she kept checking her phone, the same anxious gesture he made every time he hoped for good news that never came. Maybe it was how small she looked in those big airport chairs, the same way Emma looked when she was worried about something but trying to be brave. The departure board flickered, and Michael saw his flight to Portland was delayed by 30 minutes. Mechanical issues, the display read, which in airport speak meant he'd be lucky to get out before morning. He sighed and settled deeper into his chair, pulling his jacket tighter around his shoulders. The terminal was getting colder as the night wore on, and the heating system seemed to have given up around midnight. A few gates away, the woman had stopped crying, but was now staring at her phone with an expression of pure panic. She stood up suddenly, gathering her purse and a small carry-on bag, then sat back down just as quickly. She repeated this motion 3 times, each attempt to leave seeming to drain more energy from her already depleted reserves. Michael found himself walking toward her before he'd consciously decided to move. His mother had always said he had a problem with minding his own business, especially when it came to people who looked like they needed help. It had gotten him into trouble more times than he could count, but it had also led to some of the best moments of his life. Like the time he'd helped an elderly man change a flat tire in a thunderstorm and ended up being offered a job that lasted 2 years. Or when he'd given his lunch to a homeless veteran and discovered the man had served in the same unit as his grandfather in Vietnam. He approached the woman's gate slowly, hands in his pockets, trying to look casual rather than intrusive. She looked up as he got closer, and he could see that her eyes were red from crying, her makeup smudged despite her attempts to clean it up. "Hey," Michael said softly, sitting down 2 seats away from her. "I don't mean to bother you, but you look like you're having about as rough a night as I am. Sometimes it helps to talk to a stranger." The woman stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he was genuine or just another person looking to take advantage of her vulnerability. Michael had gotten good at reading that look over the years. When you're a single dad trying to make it in a world that seems designed for 2-parent households with steady incomes, you learn to recognize the difference between people who want to help and people who want to help themselves to whatever you have left. "I'm sorry," she said finally, her voice hoarse from crying. "I'm probably making a scene. I just don't know what to do anymore." Michael shook his head. "Trust me, I've made plenty of scenes in airports. Last month I had a complete breakdown at baggage claim in Phoenix because they lost my tool bag. Turns out it was on the wrong carousel. But by then, I'd already told 3 different airline employees exactly what I thought about their customer service. That earned him a small smile, the first crack in her composure. "I'm Rebecca," she said, extending a hand that trembled slightly. "Michael, nice to meet you, Rebecca, even if the circumstances could be better." He glanced at the legal document, still clutched in her other hand. "Legal trouble?" Rebecca's face crumpled again, and for a moment Michael thought she was going to start crying again. Instead, she took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. "My grandmother died 3 weeks ago. She was the only family I had left, and she left me everything in her will. The problem is, everything is in Maine, and I'm supposed to be there tomorrow morning to sign the final papers, or I lose it all." "What kind of everything are we talking about?" Michael asked, genuinely curious. "Her house, mostly." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It's not much, just a little cottage by the water, but it's been in our family for 60 years. She raised me there after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12. Rebecca's voice grew stronger as she talked, as if sharing the story was helping her process it. The thing is, there are debts, medical bills from her final months, property taxes that are overdue, some legal fees. If I can't pay them within 30 days of probate closing, the state will auction the property to cover what's owed. Michael nodded, understanding dawning. And you don't have the money? I lost my job 6 months ago. Marketing firm downsized, and I was one of the newer hires. I've been living on unemployment and what little savings I had, but that ran out weeks ago. I sold everything I could just to buy this plane ticket. She held up her phone, showing him a mobile banking app with a balance that made Michael wince. I have $43 to my name, and I have no idea how I'm going to pay for a hotel room or food once I get to Maine, let alone come up with $15,000 to save my grandmother's house. The number hit Michael like a physical blow. $15,000 was more money than he'd ever had at one time in his life, but it wasn't impossible money. It was the kind of money that people with good credit and steady jobs could borrow, the kind of money that represented hope rather than insurmountable debt. For someone like Rebecca, though, with no job and no family, it might as well have been $15 million. What happens if you lose the house? He asked. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, staring out the terminal windows at the planes sitting dark on the tarmac. I don't know. I really don't know. It's the only place that ever felt like home. After Grandma got sick, I spent every weekend there, helping her with the garden and listening to her stories about when she was young. She used to say that house held all our family's best memories, and that someday I'd add my own. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I know it probably sounds stupid to get this upset over a house, but it's not just about the building. It's about having a place in the world, you know, somewhere that's yours, where you belong. I've been renting the same studio apartment in Denver for 4 years, and it still doesn't feel like home. Nothing has felt like home since I was 12 years old. Michael understood that feeling better than he wanted to admit. He and Emma had moved 6 times in the past 3 years, chasing cheaper rent and better opportunities that never quite materialized. Emma had gotten good at packing her room into boxes, too good for an 8-year-old. She'd stopped decorating the walls after the 3rd move, saying there was no point if they were just going to leave again. So what's the plan? He asked. You fly to Maine tomorrow, sign the papers, and then figure out how to come up with 15 grand in 30 days. Rebecca laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's the thing. I can't even do that much. My flight was supposed to leave 2 hours ago, but it got cancelled. Mechanical problems. The next flight they could get me on doesn't arrive until tomorrow evening, which means I'll miss the appointment with the probate lawyer. His office is closed over the weekend, so the earliest I could meet with him would be Monday, but the deadline for filing the paperwork is tomorrow afternoon. Michael stared at her, the pieces clicking into place. So you're stuck? I'm stuck, she confirmed. And in about 6 hours, I'm going to lose the last connection I have to my family, to any kind of future that doesn't involve starting over with absolutely nothing. The terminal announcement system crackled to life, echoing through the mostly empty space. Attention passengers on Flight 847 to Portland. We apologize for the continued delay. Due to mechanical issues, this flight has been cancelled. Please see gate agents for rebooking options. Michael closed his eyes and let his head fall back against the chair. Portland was gone, which meant the job was gone. which meant he'd spent money he didn't have on a plane ticket to nowhere. He'd have to fly back to Chicago in the morning, tail between his legs, and figure out how to explain to Emma why Daddy's big opportunity had fallen through again. But as he sat there feeling sorry for himself, he became aware of Rebecca beside him, completely still and silent. He opened his eyes and looked at her. She was staring straight ahead, the legal document fallen from her hands to the floor, her face completely blank. "Rebecca," he said gently. She turned to him, and her expression was so lost, so utterly defeated, that Michael felt something crack inside his chest. It was the same look Emma had worn the day her hamster died, when she'd realized that sometimes bad things happened and there was nothing anyone could do to fix them. "I can't do this anymore," Rebecca whispered. "I can't keep pretending that everything's going to work out if I just try hard enough. I'm tired of being strong. I'm tired of being alone. I'm tired of losing everything that matters to me." Michael looked around the terminal, at the few other stranded passengers scattered across the gates, at the janitor slowly mopping the floor, at the departure board full of cancelled and delayed flights. He thought about Emma, probably having bad dreams, because she always did when he was away. He thought about the phone call he'd have to make in the morning, explaining to yet another potential employer why he couldn't make it after all. He thought about the stack of bills waiting on his kitchen counter and the electricity company's final notice. Then he looked at Rebecca, really looked at her, and saw something that reminded him why he'd started helping people in the first place. It wasn't because he was some kind of hero or because he thought he could save everyone. It was because sometimes, when the world felt too big and too cruel, the only thing that made sense was to make it a little smaller, a little kinder, one person at a time. "What if you didn't have to do it alone?" he heard himself saying. Rebecca looked at him with confusion. "What do you mean?" Michael was quiet for a moment, an idea forming that was either brilliant or completely insane. Probably insane. But then again, most of the best decisions he'd ever made had seemed crazy at the time. "I mean, what if someone could get you to Maine in time for your appointment? What if you had help figuring out how to save your grandmother's house?" "Michael, that's sweet, but I can't accept charity from a stranger. Besides, you said your flight was cancelled too. We're both stuck here." Michael smiled, and for the first time in months, it felt genuine. Who said anything about charity? And who said anything about flying? Rebecca stared at Michael as if he'd just suggested they hijack a plane. "What exactly are you proposing?" Michael pulled out his phone and opened a map application, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. Denver to Portland, Maine. 18 hours of straight driving, maybe 20 with stops. If we left right now, we could make it by late afternoon tomorrow. Plenty of time for your appointment. "We?" Rebecca's voice went up an octave. "Michael, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I can't ask you to drive across the entire in-country for someone you just met. That's completely insane." "Maybe," Michael said, still studying the map, "but my flight just got cancelled, which means I'm out of a job anyway. I've got nowhere else to be, and my truck is sitting in long-term parking with a full tank of gas. Plus, I've always wanted to see New England in the spring." Rebecca shook her head vigorously. "Even if I agreed to this crazy plan, which I'm not, I told you I only have $43. I can't even pay for gas, let alone split driving expenses with you." Michael looked up from his phone, meeting her eyes directly. "I didn't ask you to pay for anything." "Then why would you do this? What's in it for you?" The question hung in the air between them, and Michael realized he didn't have a simple answer. Why was he willing to drive a complete stranger across the country? Why was he volunteering to spend money he didn't have on gas and food and hotel rooms for someone else's emergency? "You know what it's like to feel completely alone," he said finally. "Most people don't. They have families to call when things get bad, safety nets, backup plans. But you and me, we're operating without a net. When we fall, we hit the ground hard, and we have to figure out how to get back up by ourselves. Rebecca's expression softened slightly, but she still looked skeptical. That doesn't explain why you'd help me. Michael was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to put into words something he'd never really examined before. 3 years ago, I was sitting in a courthouse in Chicago, waiting to hear whether I'd get to keep custody of my daughter. Her mother had decided she wanted Emma back, not because she missed her, but because she'd gotten married and thought having a kid around would make her look more stable to her new husband's family. He paused, remembering the weight of that day, the way his hands had shaken as he'd signed paper after paper. I had a decent lawyer, but her new husband had money for a really good one. I was sitting there thinking about how I was going to explain to an 8-year-old that she might have to go live with a mother she barely remembered when this older woman sat down next to me. Michael smiled at the memory. She didn't say anything at first, just sat there knitting this tiny pink sweater. After about 20 minutes, she asked if I was there for a custody hearing. When I said yes, she told me she'd been a family court clerk for 30 years, and she could always spot the parents who were there because they loved their kids versus the ones who were there because they wanted to win something. What did she say? Rebecca asked, leaning forward slightly. She said love doesn't always win in court, but it always wins in the long run. Then she gave me the name of a social worker who specialized in helping single parents navigate the system. Michael's voice grew stronger. Turns out this woman had been volunteering her time for years, helping people like me figure out how to fight for their families. She didn't know me from anyone, but she saw someone who needed help, and she decided to care. Rebecca was quiet, processing the story. Did you win? The custody case, I mean? Yeah, I did. Mostly because that social worker helped me understand what I needed to prove and how to present my case. But the point is, someone took a chance on me when I had nothing to offer in return except gratitude. Maybe this is my chance to pass that forward. Michael stood up and shouldered his duffel bag. Look, I'm not asking you to marry me or trust me with your life savings. I'm asking you to let me drive you to Maine so you can save your grandmother's house. Worst case scenario, you get there in time for your appointment and you're in the exact same position you'd be in if you flew, except you didn't have to spend money on a plane ticket. Rebecca looked down at the legal documents scattered around her feet, then back up at Michael. What about your daughter? Won't she be worried if you just disappear across the country? Michael's expression grew complicated. Emma's staying with my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, this week while I was supposed to be working in Portland. She's used to me being away for work, unfortunately. I'll call her in the morning and explain that Daddy's helping someone who needs it. She'll understand that. How can you be so sure? Because that's how I'm raising her. To believe that people help each other when things get tough, even when it's inconvenient or scary or doesn't make logical sense. Michael extended his hand toward Rebecca. So, what do you say? Want to take a road trip with a stranger and see if we can save your inheritance? Rebecca stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment. Michael could practically see her internal debate playing out across her face. Trust versus caution, hope versus experience. The desperate desire to accept help against the lifetime of lessons that had taught her to rely only on herself. Finally, she reached down and gathered up her legal documents, folding them carefully and tucking them into her purse. Then she stood up, shouldering her carry-on bag, and took Michael's hand. This is either the best decision I've ever made or the stupidest, she said. Michael grinned. In my experience, those are usually the same thing. They made their way through the terminal toward the parking shuttles, passing other stranded passengers who were settling in for a long night of sleeping in uncomfortable chairs. Michael felt a familiar energy building in his chest, the same feeling he got when he was starting a new construction project. It was anticipation, mixed with determination, the knowledge that he was about to attempt something difficult but worthwhile. The shuttle to long-term parking was nearly empty, just them and a tired-looking businessman who kept checking his phone and muttering under his breath. Rebecca sat across from Michael, staring out the window as they passed under the harsh orange lights of the airport perimeter. "Can I ask you something?" she said suddenly. "Sure. What's your daughter like?" "Emma, I mean." Michael's entire demeanor changed when he talked about Emma, his shoulders relaxing and his voice warming. "She's 8 years old, and she thinks she knows everything about everything. Last week she informed me that I was making pancakes wrong. Because I wasn't measuring the ingredients, I was just eyeballing them. So she made me watch while she carefully measured out every single thing. And you know what? Her pancakes were exactly the same as mine." Rebecca smiled. "Sounds like she's got your attention to detail." "She's got her mother's brains and my stubborn streak, which is either going to make her incredibly successful or get her into more trouble than I can handle." Michael pulled out his phone and showed Rebecca a photo. This was taken last month at her school's science fair. She built a volcano that was supposed to erupt with baking soda and vinegar, but she decided that wasn't dramatic enough, so she added food coloring, dish soap, and glitter. The photo showed a small girl with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, grinning widely as she stood next to what appeared to be a volcano covered in bright pink foam and glitter. Her clothes were splattered with the same mixture, but she looked absolutely delighted with the chaos she'd created. "She looks like trouble," Rebecca said, but she was smiling as she said it. "The best kind of trouble. She keeps asking when. She can come with me on a work trip, and I keep telling her that construction sites aren't safe for kids. But honestly, I think she'd probably end up running the whole operation within a week." The shuttle pulled up to the long-term parking lot, and they climbed off into the cool night air. Michael led the way through rows of cars toward the back corner where he'd left his truck. It was a 10-year-old Ford F-150, white with rust spots around the wheel wells and a toolbox bolted into the bed. Not pretty, but reliable. "She's not much to look at," Michael said, patting the truck's hood affectionately. "But she's gotten me from Chicago to Denver and back more times than I can count. Plus, she's got a good radio and air conditioning that works most of the time." Rebecca ran her hand along the truck's side. "When was the last time you drove this far?" "Couple years ago, Emma and I drove to the Grand Canyon for her spring break. Took us 3 days each way because we stopped at every roadside attraction she spotted. We saw the world's largest ball of twine, a museum dedicated entirely to barbed wire, and a place that claimed to have the best pie in Kansas." "Did it? Have the best pie, I mean?" Michael laughed. "It was pretty good pie." Emma declared it. Officially the best she'd ever had, but she was 9 and had eaten nothing but gas station snacks for 2 days, so her judgment might have been compromised. They loaded their bags into the truck, and Michael spent a few minutes checking the oil and tire pressure with a small flashlight he kept in the glove compartment. Rebecca watched him work, noting the careful, methodical way he approached each task. "You really know what you're doing," she observed. "When you can't afford to pay someone else to fix your problems, you learn to fix them yourself." "Emma's been helping me with basic maintenance since she was 6. She can check tire pressure and change air filters better than most adults." Michael slammed the hood shut and wiped his hands on a rag. "Everything looks good. We've got a full tank of gas, which should get us about 400 miles. I've got a cooler in the back with some water bottles and energy bars. And my GPS is programmed with the fastest route to Portland." Rebecca suddenly looked overwhelmed again. "Michael, I can't let you do this. I don't even know your last name, and you're about to spend the next 20 hours driving me across the country. What if you're a serial killer? What if I'm a serial killer?" "Are you a serial killer?" Michael asked seriously. "No, Well, neither am I, so I think we're good. He opened the passenger door for her. Look, I get it. This is crazy, but sometimes crazy is exactly what a situation calls for. Your grandmother's house is going to be gone forever if you don't make it to that appointment tomorrow. My job in Portland was going to fall through anyway because I can't afford to live. They're on what they were paying, so instead of both of us going home defeated, we take a chance on something different. Rebecca stood by the open truck door, her carry-on bag clutched in both hands. Michael could see her wavering, could almost hear the internal argument playing out in her head. What if we don't make it in time, she asked. Then we don't make it in time, and you're no worse off than you would have been sitting in that airport terminal. But what if we do make it? What if this crazy plan actually works? Rebecca took a deep breath and climbed into the truck. Okay, let's go save my inheritance. Michael started the engine, and it rumbled to life with a reassuring growl. He adjusted the mirrors, checked that Rebecca had her seatbelt on, and pulled out of the parking space. As they drove toward the exit, passing under the bright lights of the airport, Rebecca turned to look back at the terminal building. Second thoughts? Michael asked. No, she said, turning back toward the windshield. Just saying goodbye to the person who was sitting in that airport thinking her life was over. I have a feeling she's not going to be the same person who comes back. Michael merged onto the highway, following signs toward Interstate 80 East. The road stretched out ahead of them, dark and empty, leading toward a sunrise that was still hours away. In the distance, they could see the lights of Denver fading behind them, and ahead lay 1,000 miles of highway, small towns, and unknown possibilities. So, Rebecca said, settling back in her seat, tell me about this construction work you do. What kind of projects? Michael adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, glancing at the GPS display that showed 18 hours and 47 minutes to their destination. Mostly residential stuff, new home construction, renovations, some commercial work when it's available. I started out right after high school, working for my uncle's company, but he retired a few years ago and sold the business to some corporate outfit that wasn't interested in keeping the old crew. Is that when you moved to Chicago? Yeah, Emma and I packed up everything we owned, which wasn't much, and headed to the big city. I figured there'd be more opportunities, more stability. Turns out the big city is expensive, and stability is harder to find than I thought. Rebecca nodded. I know that feeling. I moved to Denver 5 years ago, thinking I was going to reinvent myself, build a career in marketing, maybe eventually buy a house and put down roots. Instead, I've been laid off twice, moved apartments 4 times, and I'm further from owning a home than I was when I started. What did you do before marketing? I was a teacher, actually. Elementary school, 4th grade. I loved it, but the pay was terrible, and the student loan payments were killing me. Everyone kept telling me that marketing was where the money was, that I could use my communication skills and make a real living. Michael glanced over at her. Do you miss it? Teaching, I mean? Rebecca was quiet for a moment, staring out at the dark landscape rolling past the window. Every single day, there's something about being in a classroom full of kids who are just figuring out how the world works, you know? They ask questions that adults have stopped asking, and they get excited about things that adults take for granted. I used to love the moment when a kid suddenly understood a concept they'd been struggling with. Their whole face would light up. Why don't you go back to it? Because I can't afford to go back to it. I've got credit card debt from the months. I was unemployed, student loans that seem to grow bigger every month no matter how much I pay, and rent that takes up more than half of whatever income I manage to scrape together. Teaching might feed my soul, but it won't pay my bills. Michael understood that calculation better than he wanted to admit. How many times had he looked at job postings for work he might actually enjoy, only to dismiss them because they didn't pay enough to support Emma? How many times had he taken construction jobs that were mindless and exhausting, simply because they offered good hourly wages? Maybe after you get your grandmother's house sorted out, you could consider teaching again, he suggested. If you own the house outright, your living expenses would be a lot lower. You might be able to afford to do work you actually care about. Rebecca turned to look at him. That's assuming I can figure out how to come up with $15,000 in the next month. Even if I make it to the appointment tomorrow and sign all the papers, I still have to find a way to pay off the debts, or I lose everything anyway. One problem at a time, Michael said. First we get you to Maine, then we figure out the money. They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the highway unwinding ahead of them like a ribbon of possibilities. The radio played softly in the background, a mix of late-night talk shows and classic rock that provided a soundtrack to their unlikely journey. Rebecca found herself relaxing for the first time in weeks, the steady rhythm of the tires on asphalt, and the warm air from the truck's heater creating a cocoon of safety she hadn't felt in a long time. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said eventually. "Shoot. What happened with Emma's mother? You mentioned she tried to get custody back, but you didn't say much about why she left in the first place." Michael's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. It wasn't a subject he talked about often, partly because it was complicated, and partly because he'd never quite figured out how to explain it without sounding bitter. Sarah was 19 when Emma was born, and I was 17. We were kids, trying to play house, and for a while we convinced ourselves it was working. Sarah was good with Emma when she was a baby, really good. She had all these ideas about the kind of mother she wanted to be, the kind of family we were going to build together. He paused to pass a slow-moving semi-truck, waiting until they were back in the right lane before continuing. But babies are hard work, and we were both working multiple jobs just to keep the lights on. Sarah started talking about how she felt trapped, how she'd never gotten to be young and figure out who she was outside of being Emma's mom. She'd see her friends from high school posting pictures on social media of college parties and spring break trips, and she'd get this look in her eyes like she was watching her life pass by through a window. Rebecca listened without interrupting, sensing that this was a story Michael didn't tell often. The breaking point came when Emma was about 2.5. Sarah got offered a marketing internship in Seattle, unpaid, but with the possibility of a full-time position after 6 months. She wanted to take it, and she wanted to take Emma with her. I said okay to the internship, but I thought Emma should stay with me because Sarah would be working 60-hour weeks and living in a studio apartment with 3 other interns. Michael's voice grew quieter. Sarah said I was trying to hold her back, that I didn't understand what it was like to feel like your whole identity had been swallowed up by being someone's parent. She said she needed space to figure out who she was, and she couldn't do that with a toddler in tow. So she left. She left. She said it would just be for 6 months, that once she got established in her career, we could work out a better arrangement. 6 months turned into a year, then 2 years. The internship turned into a job, and the job led to other opportunities. She met her husband at a company networking event, and suddenly she was living this whole other life that had no room for the family she'd started when she was 19. Rebecca felt a familiar ache in her chest, the pain of being left behind. By someone who was supposed to love you? That must have been incredibly hard. The hardest part wasn't that she left, Michael said. It was explaining to Emma why Mommy wasn't coming home, why her friends had 2 parents and she only had 1. For a long time, Emma thought it was something she'd done wrong, that if she was a better daughter, Sarah would come back. What did you tell her? Michael smiled sadly. The truth. as much of it as she could understand. That sometimes adults make decisions that don't make sense to anyone else. That love isn't always enough to make people stay, but that doesn't mean the love wasn't real. I told her that her mom loved her very much, but that she loved her dream of a different life more. They passed a sign indicating they were entering Nebraska, and Michael felt a small sense of accomplishment. They'd been driving for 3 hours, and they were making good time. The GPS showed 15 hours and 28 minutes remaining, which meant they should arrive in Portland with time to spare. "Do you ever regret it?" Rebecca asked. "Not letting Emma go with her mother, I mean. Maybe Sarah would have figured out how to balance everything if she'd had to." Michael considered the question seriously. "I think about it sometimes, especially when things are really tough, and I wonder if Emma might be better off with 2 parents and more financial stability. But then I see how happy she is, how confident and curious and kind she's growing up to be. And I know we made the right choice. Sarah sends birthday cards and Christmas presents, and she video calls Emma once a month, but Emma's never asked to go live with her. This is her home with me." Rebecca nodded. "She's lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one. Emma's the best thing that ever happened to me, even though she came along when I had no idea what I was doing. She made me grow up, made me want to be better than I thought I could be." The highway stretched ahead of them, empty except for the occasional semi-truck and the distant glow of small towns tucked between rolling hills. Michael found himself thinking about the strange turn his life had taken in the past few hours. This morning, he'd woken up in a cheap motel room in Denver, dreading the flight to Portland and the job that probably wouldn't work out anyway. Now he was driving across the country with a woman he'd just met on a mission to save her family inheritance. "Rebecca," he said suddenly. "Yeah? What's your grandmother's house like? You said it's a cottage by the water." Rebecca's expression softened, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked genuinely happy. "It's the most beautiful place in the world. It sits on about an acre of land right where the Kennebec River meets the sea, with huge old oak trees and a garden that blooms from spring through fall. The house itself is small, maybe 1,200 square feet, but every room has windows that look out over the water." She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her photos until she found what she was looking for. "This was taken last summer, the last time I visited." Michael glanced at the phone screen and saw a picture of a white clapboard cottage with blue shutters, surrounded by wildflowers and backed by the kind of water view that belonged on postcards. Even in the small phone photo, he could see why someone would fight to save it. "It's gorgeous," he said sincerely. "My great-grandfather built it in 1962 as a wedding gift for my great-grandmother. They'd met during World War II when he was stationed at the Naval Shipyard in Bath, and she always said she fell in love with Maine before she fell in love with him. After the war, they decided to make it their permanent home." Rebecca's voice took on the cadence of someone sharing a beloved family story. "They raised 4 children in that house, including my grandmother. When my great-grandparents passed away, Grandma couldn't bear to sell it, so she moved back there full-time. She said it was the only place where she could still feel connected to everyone she'd lost." "And that's where she raised you?" "From the time I was 12 until I graduated high school. Those were some of the happiest years of my life, even though I was dealing with losing my parents. Grandma had this way of making everything feel manageable, like no problem was too big to solve if you just broke it down into smaller pieces." Michael smiled. "Sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was. She taught me how to garden, how to can vegetables, how to read the weather by watching the way the light changed over the water. She used to say that the house would take care of me if I took care of it, and for 60 years, that's exactly what happened." "What went wrong? Why are there so many debts now?" Rebecca's expression grew sad again. "Cancer. It started about 3 years ago, and by the time they caught it, it had already spread. The treatments were expensive, and Medicare didn't cover everything. Grandma was too proud to ask for help, and she was too sick to keep up with the property, taxes and maintenance. She kept thinking she'd get better, that she'd have time to get caught up on everything. But she didn't get better. No, she didn't. And by the time I realized how bad things had gotten financially, it was too late to do much about it. I helped as much as I could, but I was barely keeping my own head above water. Now she's gone, and I'm supposed to somehow come up with enough money to save the place that meant everything to both of us. Michael was quiet for a moment, processing the weight of what Rebecca was carrying. It wasn't just about money or property, it was about honoring the memory of someone who had saved her, about preserving the last connection to a family that had been taken away too soon. "We're going to figure it out," he said firmly. Rebecca looked at him with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "How can you be so sure?" "Because people who love each other don't let each other face impossible situations alone. Your grandmother spent 6 years taking care of you when you needed it most. Now it's your turn to take care of the home she loved, and you don't have to do it by yourself." Rebecca felt tears pricking at her eyes again, but this time they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of something she'd almost forgotten how to feel. Hope tempered with the radical possibility that she might not have to carry this burden alone. The sun was beginning to rise over the cornfields of Iowa when Michael pulled into a rest stop just outside Des Moines. They'd been driving for 8 hours straight, taking turns behind the wheel every 2 hours, sharing gas station coffee and granola bars while watching the landscape change from the stark plains of Colorado to the rolling farmland of the Midwest. Rebecca stretched as she got out of the truck, working out the kinks in her neck from sleeping awkwardly against the passenger window. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of freshly turned earth and the promise of spring. For the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe deeply without the weight of impending disaster pressing down on her chest. "How are you feeling?" Michael asked, pulling their cooler out of the truck bed to refill it with ice from the vending machine. "Surprisingly good," Rebecca said, and realized she meant it. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for something to go wrong with this crazy plan of ours. But so far, everything's working exactly like you said it would." Michael smiled as he fed dollar bills into the ice machine, the mechanical whirring filling the early morning quiet. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the ones that work best. Drive from point A to point B, don't speed, don't take unnecessary risks, and you get where you're going. Is that your philosophy about everything? Pretty much. When Emma was a baby and I had no idea what I was doing, I used to panic about all the ways I might mess up as a parent. Then my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, who raised 6 kids of her own, told me that parenting isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up every day and doing your best with whatever information you have at the time. Michael loaded the fresh ice into the cooler and added new bottles of water and energy drinks they'd bought from the vending machine. She said kids don't need perfect parents, they need present parents. So I stopped trying to figure out how to be the world's greatest dad and started focusing on just being there for Emma, whatever that looked like on any given day. Rebecca leaned against the side of the truck, watching Michael work. There was something reassuring about his methodical approach to everything, the way he thought through each step before acting. It was so different from her own tendency to spiral into anxiety when faced with problems she couldn't immediately solve. "Can I ask you something that might sound strange?" she said. "Sure. Why aren't you married? I mean, you're clearly a good father, you're responsible. You're the kind of person who drives strangers across the country just because they need help. How has some smart woman not snatched you up?" Michael laughed, but there was something wistful in it. "Who says no one's tried?" I've dated a few people over the years, but it always gets complicated when they realize that Emma and I are a package deal. Some women think they want to date a single dad until they realize what that actually means. What does it mean? It means Emma comes first, always. It means Saturday night dates get cancelled when she's sick. It means family vacations include a third person who has strong opinions about where we eat dinner and whether the hotel has a pool. It means that anyone who wants to be part of my life has to genuinely want to be part of hers too, not just tolerate her presence. Michael closed the cooler and hefted it back into the truck bed. A couple years ago, I was seeing this woman named Jennifer. She was smart, successful, seemed to really care about both of us. Emma liked her, and I was starting to think maybe we could build something real together. Then one night, Jennifer told me she thought I was too protective of Emma, that I needed to start putting adult relationships first if I ever wanted to have a normal life. What did you say? I told her that my life with Emma was normal, at least for us. And if she couldn't understand that, then we probably weren't right for each other. Michael shrugged. She didn't take it well. Told me I was using my daughter as an excuse to avoid real intimacy, that I'd end up alone if I didn't learn to prioritize differently. Rebecca felt a flash of anger on his behalf. That's terrible. Emma's not an excuse, she's your family. Exactly. And someday maybe I'll meet someone who understands that without me having to explain it. Someone who sees Emma and me as a team rather than as a guy with baggage. He looked at Rebecca with a self-deprecating smile. Until then, we're doing just fine on our own. They got back on the road, with Rebecca taking the next driving shift while Michael dozed in the passenger seat. The highway stretched ahead of them through Iowa and into Illinois, past farmhouses and small towns that were just beginning to wake up. Rebecca found herself thinking about Michael's story, about the courage it took to choose love over convenience, to prioritize what mattered most, even when it made everything else more difficult. She'd never had to make those kinds of sacrifices for another person. Her life had been about survival, about getting by on her own, about learning not to depend on anyone else for her happiness or security. The idea of loving someone so much that their needs became more important than your own was both beautiful and terrifying. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and she glanced at it during a red light in a small Illinois town. It was from her, former supervisor at the marketing firm, asking if she'd be interested in some freelance work. 6 months ago, that message would have felt like a lifeline. Now it felt like a reminder of a life that had never quite fit, a career that had paid her bills but never fed her soul. Michael stirred as they entered the outskirts of Chicago, the familiar skyline rising ahead of them like a promise of urban complications. "This is your city," Rebecca said, glancing over at him. "It is," Michael said, fully awake now and looking out at the buildings he knew so well. "Take the next exit. I want to show you something, and we should probably stop to see Emma anyway. Let her know I'm okay and introduce you properly." Rebecca felt a flutter of nervousness at the prospect of meeting Michael's daughter. What did you say to an 8-year-old whose father was driving a strange woman across the country? How did you explain a situation that barely made sense to the adults involved? Michael directed her through the city streets to a neighborhood of small apartment buildings and corner stores, the kind of working-class area where people knew their neighbors and kids played on sidewalks under the watchful eyes of multiple adults. He had her park in front of a 3-story brick building with a small front yard full of spring flowers. "Mrs. Rodriguez lives on the 2nd floor," Michael explained as they climbed the front steps. "She's been my guardian angel since Emma and I moved here. Watches Emma when I have to work late, makes sure she gets home safely from school, feeds her Cuban rice and beans that are better than anything I've ever made." Before Michael could knock, the door flew open to reveal a small woman in her 60s with graying hair pulled back in a bun and eyes that missed nothing. Behind her, a young girl with dark hair and Michael's same thoughtful expression launched herself into his arms. "Daddy! You're back early! Did you get the job? Who's this lady? Why do you smell like gas station coffee?" Michael hugged Emma tightly, and Rebecca could see the visible relief in his shoulders as he held his daughter. This was what he'd been missing during their long drive, this connection to the person who mattered most to him in the world. "Slow down, kiddo," Michael said, setting Emma down but keeping one hand on her shoulder. "Emma, I'd like you to meet my friend Rebecca. Rebecca, this is my daughter Emma, and this is Mrs. Rodriguez, who basically keeps our lives running when I'm not here." Mrs. Rodriguez studied Rebecca with the kind of thorough assessment that only comes from years of looking out for other people's children. Rebecca felt like she was being evaluated for trustworthiness, reliability, and general fitness to be in Michael's orbit. "Nice to meet you both," Rebecca said, offering her most genuine smile. "Michael's told me wonderful things about you, Emma. I hear you're quite the scientist." Emma's eyes lit up. "Did he tell you about my volcano?" "It was supposed to be a regular volcano, but I made improvements. Mrs. Rodriguez said it looked like a unicorn threw up, but in a good way." "That sounds amazing. I would have loved to see it." Mrs. Rodriguez stepped back to let them into the apartment, which was filled with the scent of cooking onions and the sound of Spanish music playing softly from a radio in the kitchen. "Mijo," she said to Michael, "you look tired. And you," she turned to Rebecca, "you look like someone who's been carrying too much worry for too long." Rebecca was startled by the woman's perceptiveness. "I guess I have been." "Well, you're with Michael now, so that worry can be shared. He's good at carrying heavy things for other people." Mrs. Rodriguez patted Michael's arm affectionately. "Sit down, both of you. I'll make coffee, and Emma can tell you about the math test she aced yesterday." They spent an hour in Mrs. Rodriguez's warm kitchen, drinking real coffee and eating homemade pastries, while Emma regaled them with stories from school and detailed explanations of her latest science experiments. Rebecca found herself genuinely charmed by the little girl's enthusiasm and intelligence, and she could see so much of Michael in Emma's thoughtful questions and careful observations. "So why are you helping Daddy drive to Maine?" Emma asked suddenly, with the kind of direct curiosity that only children possess. Rebecca glanced at Michael, unsure how much of the story was appropriate to share with an 8-year-old. "Well, my grandmother left me her house when she died, but I have to get to Maine by today to sign some important papers, or I'll lose it. Your dad offered to help me get there when my airplane got cancelled." Emma considered this information seriously. "That's really nice of him. He does stuff like that a lot. Last month he helped our neighbor Mr. Peterson fix his roof, even though Mr. Peterson couldn't pay him. And before that, he spent his whole Saturday helping a lady from church move into a new apartment." "Emma," Michael said, clearly embarrassed. "What? It's true. You're always helping people." Emma turned back to Rebecca. "Is your grandmother's house nice?" "It's the most beautiful place I've ever seen. It's right by the water with big trees and flowers everywhere. My grandmother taught me how to garden there when I was about your age." "That sounds cool. I've never seen the ocean. Daddy says maybe we can go to a beach someday when he saves up enough money for a vacation." Rebecca felt something shift. In her chest, a warmth spreading through her as she watched Emma and Michael interact. There was such easy affection between them, such obvious love and respect. Emma clearly adored her father, and Michael's entire face softened every time he looked at his daughter. Mrs. Rodriguez had been listening to their conversation while puttering around the kitchen, and Rebecca noticed the older woman watching her with increasing approval. Finally, Mrs. Rodriguez sat down at the table with her own cup of coffee. "Rebecca," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What will you do with this house if you manage to save it? Will you live there?" Rebecca paused, realizing she hadn't really thought beyond the immediate crisis. I'm not sure. I suppose I could move there, start over somewhere new. The cost of living would be lower than Denver, and maybe I could find work as a teacher again. You're a teacher? Emma's eyes widened with interest. I was, 4th grade, like you. I taught kids about science and math and reading, and we did lots of fun experiments. Emma looked at her father with excitement. Daddy, Rebecca's a teacher. That's so cool. Michael smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm, but Rebecca could see something thoughtful in his expression, as if he was processing new information about her that changed his understanding of who she was. What made you stop teaching? Mrs. Rodriguez asked gently. Money, mostly. Teaching doesn't pay very well, and I had a lot of debt to pay off. Everyone told me I could make more money in marketing, so I tried to reinvent myself as something I wasn't really suited for. And were you happy in marketing? Rebecca laughed, but there was no humor in it. Not even a little bit. I spent every day writing copy for products I didn't care about, trying to convince people to buy things they didn't need. It paid the bills for a while, but it never felt like real work, you know, not like something that mattered. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded knowingly. My late husband used to say that there are jobs that pay your bills and jobs that feed your soul, and the lucky people find a way to make the soul-feeding jobs pay the bills too. They talked for another half hour before Michael reluctantly said they needed to get back on the road to make it to Maine on time. Emma hugged Rebecca goodbye as naturally as if they'd known each other for years. I hope you get to keep your grandmother's house, Emma said seriously, and maybe if you do, Daddy and I can come visit sometime and see the ocean. I'd like that very much, Rebecca said, and was surprised to realize she meant it completely. The idea of showing Emma and Michael her grandmother's cottage, of watching Emma's face light up when she saw the water for the first time, felt like something she genuinely wanted, rather than just something polite to say. As they walked back to the truck, Michael was unusually quiet. Rebecca could tell he was processing something, but she didn't want to push him to talk before he was ready. Your daughter is incredible, she said as they settled back into the truck for the next leg of their journey. She likes you, Michael said, starting the engine. Emma's usually pretty shy around new people, but she was completely herself with you. That doesn't happen often. She's easy to like. You're doing an amazing job with her. Michael pulled away from the curb and headed toward the highway that would take them through Indiana and Ohio toward their final destination. Can I ask you something? Sure. Back there, when you were talking about teaching, you looked happier than I've seen you since we met. Is that really what you want to do? Go back to teaching? Rebecca was quiet for a moment, considering the question. I think so. I know so. I loved being in the classroom, loved watching kids discover new things about themselves and the world. There's something magical about that moment when a child suddenly understands a concept they've been struggling with, or when they ask a question that shows they're thinking about something in a completely new way. So why don't you do it? If we manage to save your grandmother's house, if you own it free and clear, your living expenses would be minimal. You could probably afford to teach again. It's not that simple. There are still debts to pay off, still bills to cover. And even if I could make it work financially, I've been out of the classroom for 5 years. I'd have to get recertified, update my skills, convince someone to hire me despite the gap in my resume. Michael navigated through Chicago traffic, heading toward the interstate that would take them east. Those sound like solvable problems, not impossible barriers. Maybe, Rebecca said, but she sounded doubtful. What's the real obstacle? What are you really afraid of? The question caught Rebecca off guard, and she found herself really thinking about it for the first time. What was she afraid of? Failure, rejection, or something deeper? I guess I'm afraid of wanting something too much, she said finally. For the past 5 years, I've been telling myself that I chose to leave teaching, that it was a practical decision based on financial reality. If I admit that I made a mistake, that I gave up something I loved for something that never made me happy, then I have to face the fact that I wasted 5 years of my life being miserable for no good reason. Michael nodded slowly. I understand that. After Sarah left, I spent a lot of time telling myself that it was probably for the best, that Emma and I were better off without someone who didn't really want to be there. It was easier than admitting that I'd failed at something I really wanted to succeed at. How did you get past that? Emma, mostly. Watching her grow up happy and confident made me realize that just because something doesn't work out the way you planned doesn't mean it was a failure. Sarah leaving was painful, but it led to me becoming the kind of father I never would have been if I'd had someone else to rely on. Sometimes the detours teach you things you never would have learned on the straight path. They drove in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts as the landscape changed from urban to suburban to rural. They were making good time, with about 6 hours left to their destination and plenty of buffer time before Rebecca's appointment with the probate lawyer. "Can I tell you something?" Rebecca said as they crossed into Indiana. "Of course. This is the first time in years that I've felt hopeful about the future, not just about saving the house, but about what comes after. For so long, I've been focused on just surviving, just getting through each day without falling further behind. But talking to Emma about teaching, thinking about the possibility of going back to work I actually care about, it's like remembering who I used to be before everything went wrong." Michael smiled. "Maybe this trip isn't just about saving your inheritance. Maybe it's about remembering that you deserve more than just survival." "What about you? What do you deserve more of?" Michael considered the question as he merged onto Interstate 80, following signs toward Ohio. "Stability, I guess. The ability to provide for Emma without constantly worrying about money. A place that feels like home instead of just the current stop on our endless tour of cheap apartments." "Is that why you keep taking jobs in different cities, looking for that stability?" "Partly, but also because I keep thinking the next opportunity will be the one that changes everything, you know? The job that pays well enough that we can stop moving around, that lets me build something lasting for Emma's future." Rebecca turned in her seat to face him more directly. "What if the stability you're looking for isn't about finding the perfect job? What if it's about finding the right place to put down roots, regardless of what work you're doing?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're skilled at construction work, right? You know how to build things, fix things, manage projects. Those are valuable skills anywhere. Instead of chasing jobs in expensive cities where the cost of living eats up any extra income, what if you found a smaller place where your skills would be in demand and your money would go further?" Michael had never really considered that possibility. He'd always assumed that bigger cities meant better opportunities, more chances to get ahead. But Rebecca's question made him think about Mrs. Rodriguez's neighborhood, where he knew every shopkeeper and Emma could walk to school safely, where people looked out for each other and life moved at a more manageable pace. "Like where?" he asked. Rebecca smiled. "Like coastal Maine, for instance. Lots of old houses that need renovation, summer people who want decks and additions built, year-round residents who need reliable contractors for repairs and maintenance. And the cost of living is reasonable if you're not trying to live in Portland or Bar Harbor." Michael glanced at her, seeing where her thoughts were heading. "You're suggesting I move to Maine?" "I'm suggesting you consider it, if I manage. To save my grandmother's house, I'm going to need a lot of work done on it. The roof needs repair, the kitchen hasn't been updated since the 1980s, and the deck is starting to rot. I can't afford to pay big city contractor prices, but I could afford to pay someone fair wages for good work, especially if that someone was also a friend." The idea settled into Michael's mind like a seed finding fertile ground. Maine. A fresh start in a place where Emma could grow up near the ocean. where he could build a business based on relationships rather than constant competition, where they could finally stop running from place to place in search of something better. What about Emma's school, her friends? Maine has good schools, especially in the smaller towns where they know every kid by name. And Emma's 8 years old. Kids that age are resilient, especially when the change is clearly for the better. Besides, didn't she just say she'd never seen the ocean? Michael found himself seriously considering the possibility for the first time. It was crazy, making such a major life decision based on a conversation with someone he'd known for less than 24 hours. But then again, everything about this trip was crazy, and so far it was working out better than any carefully planned decision he'd made in recent memory. "We're getting ahead of ourselves," he said finally. "First, we have to actually save your house." "True," Rebecca agreed. "But it's nice to have something to hope for beyond just solving the immediate crisis." They continued east through Indiana and into Ohio, taking turns driving and sharing stories about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. With each mile, the connection between them deepened, moving from the desperate alliance of two strangers, helping each other to something that felt like genuine friendship, and perhaps something more. As the sun began to set behind them, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they could see signs indicating they were getting close to their destination. Portland, Maine was less than 3 hours away, and Rebecca's appointment with the probate lawyer was scheduled for 10 o'clock the next morning. "We're actually going to make it," Rebecca said, a note of wonder in her voice. "Did you doubt we would?" "Honestly, yes. This whole thing seemed too good to be true, too simple. I keep waiting for something to go wrong." Michael reached over and squeezed her hand gently. "Sometimes things go right, Rebecca. Sometimes people help each other just because they can, and sometimes crazy plans work out exactly the way they're supposed to." As they drove toward the final hours of their journey, both of them began to understand that this trip had become about much more than saving a house or avoiding a job that wasn't meant to be. It had become about the possibility of new beginnings, about the courage to hope for something better, and about the unexpected ways that strangers can become the most important people in your life. The morning air in Portland, Maine, carried the scent of salt and pine as Michael and Rebecca stood in front of the weathered brick building that housed the law offices of Hartwell and Associates. They had arrived the night before, exhausted but triumphant, checking into a modest motel just off Route 1, with barely enough money between them to cover 2 rooms and a shared dinner at the diner next door. Rebecca clutched the manila folder, containing all her grandmother's legal documents, her hands trembling slightly despite the warm May sunshine. She had changed into the one professional outfit she'd packed, a navy blue dress that had seen better days but still looked respectable enough for what might be the most important meeting of her life. "You ready for this?" Michael asked, adjusting the collar of his one button-down shirt. He'd insisted on coming with her to the appointment, claiming he wanted to make sure everything went smoothly, but Rebecca suspected he was just as nervous as she was about what they might discover inside. "As ready as I'll ever be," Rebecca replied, taking a deep breath and pushing open the heavy glass door. The law office was exactly what Rebecca had expected from her phone conversations with Attorney Hartwell. Old-fashioned and slightly stuffy, with dark wood paneling and leather-bound, books lining the walls. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair, looked up from her computer as they entered. "You must be Ms. Reynolds," she said warmly. "Mr. Hartwell is expecting you. I'm so sorry for your loss. Your grandmother was a wonderful woman." "You knew her?" Rebecca asked, surprised. "Oh yes, dear. Eleanor came in here every few months for years, always making sure her affairs were in order. She talked about you constantly, how proud she was of your teaching career, how much she missed having you closer to home." Rebecca felt a pang of guilt at the reminder of how infrequently she'd visited in recent years, how busy she'd been with her own problems to pay proper attention to the woman who had raised her. "Thank you. That means a lot to hear." The receptionist led them down a hallway lined with portraits of distinguished-looking men in suits, stopping at a door marked Robert Hartwell, Senior Partner. She knocked twice and opened the door to reveal a man in his 60s sitting behind a massive oak desk, papers spread out in front of him like a battle plan. "Ms. Reynolds," he said, rising to shake her hand, "please sit down. And you must be the friend who drove her across the country. That was quite an undertaking." Michael shook the lawyer's hand firmly. "Michael Chen. Glad we could make it here. On time." Attorney Hartwell gestured for them to sit in the leather chairs facing his desk, then settled back into his own chair with the air of someone who had delivered both good news and bad news so many times that he'd developed a careful neutrality about both. "Before we begin," he said, "I want you to understand that your grandmother was very specific about her wishes. She knew the financial situation she was leaving behind, and she was very concerned about your ability to handle the burden she was passing on to you." Rebecca's heart sank. "How bad is it? The debt, I mean." Hartwell opened a thick file and pulled out several documents. The total amount owed, including medical bills, property taxes and legal fees, comes to exactly $14,732. All of it must be satisfied within 30 days of probate closing, or the property will be sold to cover the debts. $14,732, Rebecca repeated numbly. It might as well have been 14 million for all the chance she had of coming up with that amount. "However," Hartwell continued, "your grandmother was not without resources of her own. She was simply, shall we say, creative in how she chose to preserve them for you." Michael leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Hartwell smiled for the first time since they'd entered his office. "Eleanor Reynolds was one of the shrewdest women I've ever known. She understood that if she left you cash, it would be subject to estate taxes and could be claimed by creditors. So instead, she converted her life savings into something that legally belongs to the house itself, not to her estate." Rebecca stared at him in confusion. "I don't understand." "Your grandmother spent the last 3 years of her life systematically hiding her money in plain sight. Every improvement she made to the property, every repair, every upgrade was paid for in cash and documented as increasing the property's value rather than as liquid assets that could be claimed by creditors." Hartwell pulled out a thick folder filled with receipts and invoices. New roof in 2022, $8,000. Kitchen renovation in 2023, $12,000. Bathroom updates, electrical work, plumbing repairs, hardwood floor restoration. All of it paid for with cash from her savings account, all of it adding to the assessed value of the property. Michael whistled low under his breath. She turned her savings into equity. Exactly. And there's more. Hartwell opened another folder. "Did you know your grandmother was quite the gardener? She spent considerable money on what she called landscaping improvements. Mature fruit trees, perennial flower beds, a vegetable garden with raised beds and professional irrigation, a greenhouse that was built just last year." Rebecca felt tears building in her eyes. She always said the garden was her pride and joy. Well, according to the county assessor, all of those improvements have brought the total value of the property to just over $260,000. The house you're inheriting isn't just a cottage by the water, Ms. Reynolds. It's a significantly valuable piece of real estate. The numbers were starting to penetrate Rebecca's shock. So the house is worth enough to pay off the debts with money left over? Much more than enough. But here's where your grandmother's real genius shows. She knew you might not want to sell the property, so she arranged for one final surprise. Hartwell reached into his desk drawer and pulled out an envelope with Rebecca's name written on it in her grandmother's careful handwriting. She asked me to give you this after I explained the financial situation. Rebecca opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in her grandmother's familiar script, along with a small silver key. "My dearest Rebecca," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then old Mr. Hartwell has done his job properly and explained how I've tried to make things easier for you. But there's one more thing you need to know. Behind the loose board in the pantry wall right behind where I kept the preserves, you'll find a metal box. The key is with this letter. Inside that box is enough cash to pay off every debt on this property and give you a fresh start in the home where you belong. I've been saving it for years, keeping it safe for the day when you might need it most. The money came from your great-grandfather's life insurance policy, money that was always meant to keep this house in our family. Use it well, sweetheart, and know that wherever I am, I'm proud of the woman you've become." Rebecca was crying openly now, clutching the letter to her chest. She knew I was struggling, and she made sure I'd be okay. Michael felt his own eyes getting damp as he watched Rebecca process her grandmother's final gift. The old woman had orchestrated everything perfectly, ensuring that her granddaughter would not only inherit the house, but would have the means to keep it. "There's one more thing," Hartwell said gently. "Your grandmother also left specific instructions about what she hoped you would do with the property. She mentioned that she believed you'd be happiest returning to teaching, and she thought the house would make an excellent bed and breakfast for summer visitors if you needed additional income." Rebecca looked up from the letter. "A bed and breakfast?" The property is already zoned for commercial use, and with 4 bedrooms and those spectacular water views, it could be quite successful. Your grandmother had researched the permit requirements and even spoke with the local tourism board about the potential. Michael could see the wheels turning in Rebecca's mind as she considered the possibilities. A bed and breakfast would provide steady income while allowing her to live in her grandmother's house and potentially return to teaching. It was the perfect solution to her financial worries and her desire to come home. Of course, Hartwell continued, running a bed and breakfast would require significant work. The house would need to be brought up to commercial standards, guest bathrooms would need to be added, and you'd need someone skilled in construction and renovation to handle all the necessary improvements. Rebecca and Michael looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. The lawyer's words seemed to be describing exactly the kind of work Michael specialized in, exactly the kind of partnership they had been tentatively discussing during their long drive across the country. "How long do I have to decide?" Rebecca asked. "The property is yours as soon as we complete the paperwork today. What you do with it after that is entirely up to you. But I will say this. Your grandmother believed very strongly that this house was meant to be lived in, not left empty. She wanted it to be full of life and laughter again." They spent the next 2 hours signing documents, transferring titles, and making arrangements for Rebecca to access the safety deposit box where her grandmother had kept important papers. By noon, Rebecca officially owned the house where she had spent the happiest years of her childhood, along with enough money to secure her future. As they walked out of the law office into the bright May sunshine, Rebecca felt like she was walking into a completely different life than the one she had woken up to just 24 hours earlier. Everything had changed, but more than that, everything had become possible. "So," Michael said as they climbed back into his truck, "want to go see your house?" The drive from Portland to the coastal village of Pemaquid Point took 45 minutes through some of the most beautiful scenery either of them had ever seen. Pine forests gave way to rolling hills dotted with farms, which in turn gave way to rocky coastline where the Atlantic Ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Rebecca directed Michael down a winding road that led through a small village, with a general store, a church, and a few houses clustered around a common green. Just past the village center, they turned onto a narrow lane marked by a weathered sign that read, "Seaside Cottage, Private Drive." The cottage appeared around a bend in the road like something from a postcard, exactly as beautiful as Rebecca had described during their long journey. White clapboard siding gleamed in the afternoon sun, blue shutters framed windows that sparkled like jewels, and the whole structure was surrounded by gardens that were just beginning to show their spring colors. But it was the setting that took Michael's breath away. The house sat on a small bluff, overlooking a cove where the Kennebec River widened as it approached the sea. Ancient oak trees provided shade and windbreak, while a carefully maintained lawn sloped down toward the water's edge, where a small dock extended into the calm water. "Rebecca," Michael said softly, "this is incredible." Rebecca was standing beside the truck, staring at her inheritance with a mixture of joy and overwhelming responsibility. "I'd forgotten how peaceful it is here. Look, you can see 3 different lighthouses from the front porch." They approached the house slowly, taking in details that hadn't been visible in the photographs Rebecca had shown him. The roof was indeed new, with cedar shingles that would weather to a beautiful silver gray. Over time, the wraparound porch was sturdy and inviting, with wicker furniture that had been carefully covered for the winter. Flower boxes under every window showed the first green shoots of what would undoubtedly be spectacular summer displays. Rebecca used the key Attorney Hartwell had given her to open the front door, and they stepped into a house that felt like it had been waiting patiently for her return. Everything was exactly as she remembered, but cleaner and brighter than it had been during her grandmother's final months, when illness had made housekeeping difficult. The front room was furnished with comfortable, well-maintained furniture that looked like it had been chosen for durability and comfort rather than fashion. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with built-in bookshelves on either side, filled with what appeared to be decades' worth of carefully curated reading material. Wide windows offered views of the water from every angle, filling the room with natural light that made everything seem to glow. "The kitchen's through here," Rebecca said, leading Michael through a doorway into what was clearly the heart of the home. The renovation her grandmother had invested in was immediately apparent. New cabinets, modern appliances, granite countertops that complemented rather than competed with the house's traditional character. A large island provided workspace and casual seating, while French doors opened onto a screened porch that overlooked the gardens. "This is where she always did her canning," Rebecca said, running her hand over the smooth countertop. "Every summer, we'd spend weeks putting up vegetables from the garden and fruit from the orchard. The pantry used to be filled with jars of tomatoes and green beans and peach preserves." Michael examined the workmanship of the renovation with a professional eye. "This is quality work. Your grandmother didn't cut any corners. She never did anything halfway. If something was worth doing, it was worth doing right." Rebecca opened the door to the pantry and immediately spotted the loose board her grandmother had mentioned in the letter. Behind it, exactly as promised, was a metal strongbox that contained neat stacks of cash totaling exactly $15,000. "She thought of everything," Rebecca whispered, holding the money that represented her grandmother's final act of love and protection. They explored the rest of the house together, Michael mentally cataloging the work that would be needed to convert it to a bed and breakfast, while Rebecca reacquainted herself with rooms full of memories. The upstairs bedrooms were spacious and bright, each with water views and enough character to charm potential guests. The bathrooms would indeed need updating to meet commercial standards, but the bones of the house were solid and beautiful. It was in the back bedroom, the one that had been Rebecca's during her teenage years, that she finally broke down completely. The room was exactly as she had left it when she went away to college. Twin bed with a patchwork quilt her grandmother had made, desk by the window where she had done her homework while looking out at the water, bookshelves filled with the novels that had shaped her understanding of the world. She kept it like a shrine, Rebecca sobbed, sitting on the edge of the bed she had slept in for 6 years. Like she was always expecting me to come home. Michael sat beside her, not saying anything, just being present while she grieved for all the visits she hadn't made, all the conversations she had been too busy to have, all the time she had wasted, thinking there would always be more time. "I should have been here more," she said. "I should have visited every month, helped her with the bills, made sure she wasn't handling everything alone." "You were building your own life," Michael said gently. She understood that. "Look around, Rebecca. Everything about this house says she was proud of you, that she loved you exactly as you were. The letter, the money, the way she preserved your room. None of that says she felt neglected. It says she felt grateful for the time you did spend together." Rebecca wiped her eyes and looked around the room with fresh perspective. Her grandmother had indeed kept it as a shrine, but not a sad one. It was a celebration of the girl who had lived here, a testament to the love that had shaped both of their lives. "What do you think?" she asked Michael. "About the bed and breakfast idea, I mean. Does it seem feasible?" Michael had been thinking about exactly that question as they toured the house. More than feasible. The location is perfect. The house has incredible character, and the views alone would justify premium rates. You'd need to add private bathrooms to at least 2 of the guest rooms, update the electrical to handle higher capacity, and probably add some kind of common area where guests could gather. But none of that is insurmountable. What about permits and regulations and all the business side of things? Those are learnable skills, and you'd be surprised how much help small communities like this provide to new businesses. Tourism is important to the local economy, so there's incentive for everyone to help you succeed. They walked out onto the back porch as the afternoon sun began to slant toward evening. The view from here was even more spectacular than from the front of the house, with the river widening toward the sea and islands dotting the water like sleeping whales. "I keep waiting to wake up," Rebecca said. 24 hours ago, I was crying in an airport because my life was falling apart. Now I own a house on the coast of Maine and have enough money to start over completely. It doesn't seem real." Michael leaned against the porch railing, looking out at the water where a lobster boat was heading home for the day. "Maybe the real part isn't the house or the money. Maybe the real part is that you took a chance on trusting a stranger, and it led you exactly where you needed to be." Rebecca studied his profile as he gazed out at the water. Over the past day and night, she had watched him drive 18 hours without complaint, navigate unfamiliar cities without getting lost, handle every crisis with calm competence, and treat her grandmother's memory with genuine respect. He had asked for nothing in return except the satisfaction of helping someone who needed it. "What about you?" she asked. "What happens now? Do you go back to Chicago and look for another construction job?" Michael was quiet for a long moment, and Rebecca could see him wrestling with something important. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about finding the right place to put down roots instead of chasing jobs in expensive cities. And this feels like the right place." He turned to face her directly. "Not just because of the work opportunity, though that's part of it, but because of the community, the pace of life, the idea that Emma could grow up somewhere like this, somewhere safe and beautiful, where people know each other and look out for each other." Rebecca felt her heart start to beat faster. "Are you saying you'd consider moving here, to Maine?" "I'm saying I'd consider moving here if someone I trusted thought it was a good idea, if someone needed a business partner who knew construction and wasn't afraid of hard work, if someone thought a single dad and his 8-year-old daughter might fit into a community like this." Rebecca looked around at the house her grandmother had left her, at the gardens that would need tending, at the water that Emma had never seen. She thought about the bed and breakfast that could provide both income and purpose, about the teaching job she might be able to find in the local school district, about the possibility of building something meaningful with someone who understood, the value of family and commitment. "I think," she said carefully, "that someone would be very lucky to have a partner like that. And I think an 8-year-old girl would love having an ocean in her backyard." Michael smiled, the kind of smile that transformed his entire face. "So we're really doing this? Making a plan based on knowing each other for one day? We're really doing this. Though I think we should probably call Emma and make sure she's okay with the idea of a major life change." They spent the evening walking around the property, making plans and dreaming about possibilities. Michael sketched rough diagrams of how the guest room renovations might work, while Rebecca calculated potential income from summer visitors and researched what it would take to get back into teaching. As the sun set over the water, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they sat on the front porch with cups of tea made from supplies they'd found in the kitchen. For the first time in years, Rebecca felt completely at peace, completely at home. "Thank you," she said to Michael, as the stars began to appear overhead. "For what? For seeing someone who needed help and deciding to care. For driving across the country with a stranger. For believing that crazy plans sometimes work out exactly the way they're supposed to." Michael reached over and took her hand, and Rebecca didn't pull away. "Thank you for trusting me enough to get in that truck. For showing me that there's more to life than just surviving from one paycheck to the next. For reminding me that home isn't a place you find, it's a place you build with people who matter to you." As they sat together in the gathering darkness, listening to the gentle sound of water lapping against the shore, both of them understood that they had found something neither had been looking for when they met in that airport terminal. They had found the possibility of a future that neither of them could have imagined alone, but that together seemed not only possible, but inevitable. 6 months later, the first snow of winter dusted the oak trees around Seaside Cottage as Rebecca stood in the kitchen, kneading bread dough while watching Emma build a snowman in the backyard. The little girl had adapted to life in Maine with the resilience that only children possess, throwing herself into her new school, making friends with the local kids, and declaring herself an expert on tide pools and hermit crabs within her first month on the coast. The transformation of the house had been more extensive than any of them had initially imagined. What started as plans for simple guest room renovations had evolved into a complete restoration that honored the cottage's historic character while creating the infrastructure needed for a successful business. Michael had thrown himself into the project with the passion of someone who was finally building something that mattered, working 16-hour days through the summer and fall to have everything ready for the following tourist season. The guest wing now included 3 beautifully appointed bedrooms, each with its own bathroom and sitting area, all designed to maximize the spectacular water views while providing the privacy and comfort that discerning travelers expected. The common areas had been expanded to include a sunroom, where guests could enjoy breakfast while watching lobster boats head out to check their traps, and a library where evening conversations could unfold around the restored stone fireplace. But the most significant change wasn't architectural. It was the way the house felt alive again, filled with the sounds of daily life and future planning. Emma's laughter echoed through rooms that had been silent for too long, while Michael's steady presence provided the stability that Rebecca had never realized she was missing. The 3 of them had settled into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing, as if they had always been a family rather than 3 individuals who had found each other by chance. Rebecca had indeed returned to teaching, accepting a position at the local elementary school that allowed her to rediscover her passion for education while maintaining the flexibility needed to manage the bed and breakfast during peak season. The principal, a woman named Margaret Walsh, who had taught in the same building for 30 years, had been delighted to hire someone with Rebecca's experience and enthusiasm. "You remind me why I became a teacher in the first place," Margaret had told her after observing her first week of classes. "These kids need someone who sees potential instead of problems, who gets excited about learning right along with them." The fourth grade classroom had become Rebecca's sanctuary, a place where she could channel all the nurturing instincts that had been dormant during her years in marketing. Her students adored her, drawn to her genuine interest in their thoughts and ideas, her willingness to turn any question into an opportunity for exploration. She had started an after-school gardening club that met twice a week in the greenhouse her grandmother had built, teaching kids to grow vegetables they could take home to their families. Emma had been her most enthusiastic student, despite being technically too young for fourth grade. Rebecca had arranged for her to spend time in the classroom during her planning periods, helping with small tasks and soaking up the academic environment that seemed to energize both of them. The other teachers had begun joking that Emma was getting a graduate-level education in elementary pedagogy, but Rebecca could see how much the little girl enjoyed being part of the learning community. Michael's construction business had grown beyond anything he had imagined possible when he first decided to make Maine his home. Word of his craftsmanship had spread quickly through the tight-knit coastal communities, leading to a steady stream of projects that ranged from historic restorations to modern additions. He had developed a reputation for understanding what clients wanted, even when they couldn't articulate it themselves, and for completing projects on time and within budget. More importantly, he had found the professional satisfaction that had eluded him during his years of chasing opportunities in distant cities. Every project was a chance to improve someone's quality of life, to preserve a piece of local history, or to help a family create the home they had always envisioned. He worked with his hands and his heart, and it showed in everything he built. The relationship between Michael and Rebecca had evolved gradually, built on mutual respect, shared responsibilities, and the kind of deep compatibility that comes from weathering challenges together. They had never formally discussed their feelings, never made grand declarations or dramatic gestures. Instead, their connection had deepened through daily acts of consideration. Rebecca packing extra coffee for Michael's early morning job sites, Michael surprising her with wildflowers picked during his lunch breaks, both of them working together to create bedtime stories that helped Emma process the changes in her life. It was Emma who finally forced the conversation they had both been avoiding. One evening in early December, as the three of them decorated the Christmas tree they had cut from the property's small forest, she had looked up from the ornament she was hanging and made an observation with characteristic directness. "Are you and Rebecca going to get married, Daddy?" she asked, as casually as she might have inquired about dinner plans. Michael nearly dropped the string of lights he was untangling, while Rebecca felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment and something that might have been hope. They had been so careful to maintain appropriate boundaries, so conscious of not wanting to complicate their business partnership or disrupt Emma's sense of security. "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" Michael managed to say, his voice carefully neutral. Emma shrugged with 8-year-old logic. "Because you look at each other the way Mr. and Mrs. Patterson look at each other, and they've been married for like 100 years. And because Rebecca makes you smile the way you used to smile in pictures with Mommy, except different. Better, maybe." Rebecca set down the ornament she had been holding and knelt beside Emma's chair. "How would you feel if we did get married? Would that be okay with you?" "Are you kidding?" Emma's face lit up with excitement. "That would be the best Christmas present ever. I could have a mom who actually wants to be here, and you could have a daughter who thinks you're the smartest." person in the world, and Daddy could stop worrying about whether we're going to have to move again. Michael looked at Rebecca over Emma's head, seeing his own feelings reflected in her expression. Love, certainly, but also wonder at how completely their lives had intertwined, how impossible it had become to imagine a future that didn't include all three of them together. "Well," he said, reaching into his pocket for something he had been carrying for weeks, waiting for exactly this moment. "I guess it's a good thing I've been planning ahead." The ring was simple and perfect. A single diamond set in white gold, classic enough to honor tradition, but unique enough to reflect Rebecca's individual style. Michael had chosen it with the help of a jeweler in Bath who specialized in estate pieces, wanting something with history and character rather than mass-produced perfection. "Rebecca," he said, dropping to one knee beside the Christmas tree while Emma bounced with excitement, "I know we've only known each other for 6 months, and I know this probably seems crazy to anyone who doesn't understand what we've built together, but I can't imagine my life without you in it. You've given Emma and me not just a home, but a family. You've shown me what it means to be truly happy, not just content or getting by, but genuinely joyful about waking up each morning." Rebecca was crying now, but they were tears of joy rather than the desperate sadness that had characterized so much of her adult life. "Michael, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not asking you to marry me because it would be convenient or practical, though it would be both of those things. I'm asking you to marry me because I love you completely and permanently, and because I want to spend the rest of my life building something beautiful with you. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Rebecca whispered, then said it again more loudly. "Yes, absolutely yes." Emma cheered as Michael slipped the ring onto Rebecca's finger, then launched herself into a group hug that knocked all three of them onto the floor in a tangle of arms and laughter and Christmas tree lights. It was chaotic and imperfect and exactly right. The wedding took place the following spring, on the lawn overlooking the water, where Rebecca's grandmother had hosted countless family gatherings over the decades. It was a small ceremony, attended by the friends they had made in their new community, Mrs. Rodriguez, who had flown in from Chicago with tears of joy in her eyes, and Attorney Hartwell, who had become something of a family friend in the months since that first momentous meeting. Emma served as both maid of honor and flower girl, wearing a dress she had helped choose and carrying a bouquet of wildflowers picked from the gardens she had helped plant. She took her responsibilities seriously, making sure Rebecca's dress was arranged properly and reminding the minister to speak loudly enough for everyone to hear. Rebecca wore her grandmother's pearls and carried a bouquet that included flowers from every season: spring daffodils and tulips, summer roses and delphiniums, fall chrysanthemums and asters, and winter evergreens and holly. It was her way of honoring not just her grandmother's memory, but the full cycle of love and loss and renewal that had brought her to this moment. The ceremony itself was simple and heartfelt, officiated by the minister from the local church, who had known Eleanor Reynolds for 30 years and had watched Rebecca grow up during her teenage summers. He spoke about the mystery of how love finds us when we least expect it, about the courage required to build a family from choice rather than obligation, and about the special blessing of a home that serves not just its own inhabitants, but welcomes strangers and turns them into friends. Michael's vows focused on gratitude, for Rebecca's trust in accepting his help during her darkest hour, for her courage in believing they could build something lasting together, for the way she had embraced Emma not as an obligation, but as a gift. He promised to be worthy of the love she had shown them both, to support her dreams as enthusiastically as she had supported his, and to make sure their home remained a place of joy and welcome for as long as they lived there. Rebecca's vows were about transformation, how meeting Michael had reminded her that she was capable of much more than mere survival. how his steadiness had given her permission to hope for things she had stopped believing were possible, how their partnership had shown her that love could be both passionate and practical, romantic and real. She promised to cherish the family they had created, to honor the memory of those who had come before them, and to fill their shared life with as much laughter and adventure as possible. But it was Emma's addition to the ceremony that brought tears to every eye. Unplanned and unscripted, she stepped forward just as the minister was about to pronounce them married and asked if she could say something. "I just want to thank Rebecca," she said in her clear, confident voice, "for loving my daddy enough to take a chance on us. And I want to thank Daddy for being brave enough to help a stranger, because if he hadn't, we never would have found our real home. And I want to thank my other mommy, even though she's not here, for giving me life. And I want to thank my new mommy for giving me a family. I think that's all the important stuff." The reception was held in the gardens, with tables set up under the oak trees and strings of lights, creating a canopy of stars overhead. The local restaurant had catered a feast of Maine specialties: lobster rolls and clam chowder, blueberry pie and whoopie pies, corn on the cob from gardens just like the one Rebecca tended behind the house. There was dancing on the lawn as the sun set over the water, with Emma twirling between the adults and occasionally stepping on toes without apology. As the evening wound down and the last guest departed, the three of them sat on the front porch steps, still dressed in their wedding finery, but comfortable enough to kick off their shoes and watch the stars appear over the water. Emma had fallen asleep curled against Rebecca's side, exhausted by the excitement and emotion of the day. "So," Michael said, his arm around his new wife's shoulders, "how does it feel to be officially stuck with us?" Rebecca laughed softly, careful not to wake Emma. "Like coming home after a very long journey, like everything that happened before was just preparation for this." "Any regrets about the path that led us here? About the job you lost, the struggles that brought you to that airport?" Rebecca considered the question seriously. 6 months earlier, she would have said that losing her marketing job was the worst thing that had ever happened to her. Now, she understood it had been a necessary ending, clearing the way for a beginning she never could have imagined. "No regrets," she said firmly. "I mean, I wish I had been here more for Grandma during her final years, and I wish the financial stress hadn't been so overwhelming for so long. But if any of it had been different, we might never have found each other. You might not have been in that airport, or I might not have been desperate enough to accept help from a stranger. Sometimes the worst things lead to the best things, if you're brave enough to follow where they lead." Michael nodded, thinking about his own journey to this porch, this family, this sense of belonging he had never quite found before. "Emma asked me something the other day that I've been thinking about." "What was that?" "She wanted to know if I missed her biological mother, if I ever wished things had worked out differently with Sarah. I told her the truth, that I'll always be grateful to Sarah for giving me Emma, but that I don't miss the person she became or the life we tried to build together, that sometimes people come into our lives to give us exactly what we need, even if they can't stay to be part of what we build with that gift." Rebecca understood what he was really saying. Sarah had given him Emma, and losing Sarah had taught him what he really wanted in a partner. Rebecca's grandmother had given her this house and the financial security to start over, but more than that, she had raised Rebecca to believe that love was action, not just feeling. All of their experiences, both joyful and painful, had prepared them to recognize and appreciate what they had found together. "What do you think she would have thought of all this?" Rebecca asked, gesturing toward the house, the gardens, the life they were building. "Grandma, I mean." Michael smiled. "I think she would have been thrilled to see the house full of life again, to know that her sacrifice made it possible for you to come home and build something beautiful here. But mostly I think she would have been proud of the woman you've become, the teacher you are, the mother you're going to be to Emma." "The mother I already am to Emma," Rebecca corrected, gently. "The paperwork is just a formality." They had indeed begun the adoption process, with Emma's enthusiastic consent and even a supportive letter from Sarah, who had remarried and started a new family in Seattle. The legal proceedings would take several months to complete, but in every way that mattered, Emma was already Rebecca's daughter, just as Rebecca was already Emma's mother. The bed and breakfast had exceeded all their expectations during its first partial season of operation. Even with only a few months of bookings, they had hosted guests from 12 different states and 3 countries, all of whom had left glowing reviews and promised to return. The combination of spectacular location, thoughtful hospitality, and genuine warmth had created exactly the kind of experience that turned first-time visitors into lifelong advocates. More than the financial success, though, was the personal satisfaction of watching strangers become friends, of facilitating the kind of restorative experiences that people carried home with them. A couple celebrating their 40th anniversary had renewed their wedding vows on the lawn at sunset. A family dealing with the loss of a grandparent had found comfort in the house's peaceful atmosphere and Rebecca's gentle understanding of grief. A burned-out executive from Boston had spent a week helping Emma with her garden and left with a completely new perspective on what constituted meaningful work. "You know what I love most about what we've built here?" Rebecca said as they watched. "A shooting star streak across the clear night sky. What's that?" "It's not just about us anymore. This house, this business, this family we've created, it's all connected to something bigger. We're part of this community now, part of the network of people who take care of each other and welcome strangers and preserve the things that matter." Grandma would have loved that. Michael squeezed her hand. She did love that. Everything she did was designed to make this possible. The way she saved her money, the improvements she made to the house, even the way she chose Attorney Hartwell to handle her affairs. She was building a foundation for exactly what we've created. As if summoned by their conversation, a gentle breeze stirred the trees around them, carrying the scent of salt air and pine needles, the same combination that had welcomed Rebecca home to this place 20 years earlier as a grieving 12-year-old. But now she wasn't grieving anymore. She was celebrating, surrounded by the people she loved most in a place that felt like the center of the universe. Emma stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about tide pools and Christmas cookies before, settling deeper into Rebecca's arms. The sight of her stepdaughter's peaceful face, relaxed in complete trust and security, filled Rebecca with a contentment she had never known was possible. "We should probably get this little one to bed," she whispered to Michael. "Probably, though I hate to end this perfect day." "It's not ending," Rebecca said as they carefully lifted Emma and carried her into the house that was now officially theirs together. "It's just beginning." The next morning dawned clear and bright, with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything seem possible. Rebecca woke early, as had become her habit, and slipped out of bed to make coffee and watch the sunrise from the kitchen window. The view never got old. Lobster boats heading out to check their traps, seabirds diving for breakfast, the lighthouse on the distant point beginning to fade as natural light replaced its beacon. Michael found her there a few minutes later still, in her pajamas and robe, cradling a mug of coffee and smiling at something only she could see. "Good morning, Mrs. Chen," he said, kissing the top of her head and reaching around her for his own mug. "Good morning, Mr. Chen. Sleep well?" "Like a rock. Emma's still out cold. I think yesterday wore her out." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the world wake up around them. In a few hours, Rebecca would head to school to teach her eager fourth graders about the life cycle of butterflies. Michael would drive to a job site where he was helping a young family renovate a farmhouse they had bought with dreams of raising their children in the country. Emma would walk to the end of their lane to catch the school bus, her backpack heavy with homework and her head full of plans for the science project she was building with her new best friend. It was an ordinary morning in an extraordinary life. The kind of day that seemed unremarkable until you remembered how miraculous it was that any of it existed at all. "I've been thinking," Michael said as he watched a great blue heron wade through the shallows near their dock. "About what?" "About that night in the airport, when you were sitting there crying and I was trying to figure out how to help without being intrusive. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had just minded my own business, walked past you to my own gate, and pretended I didn't see that you were in trouble?" Rebecca considered the question. "I probably would have spent the night in the airport, flown back to Denver the next day, and eventually lost the house. I'd be working some job I hated, living in an apartment I couldn't afford, wondering why I felt so empty all the time. And I would have taken that construction job in Portland that probably would have lasted 3 months, then moved on to the next city with the next promise of something better. Emma and I would still be living in other people's spaces, never quite belonging anywhere. Instead of which, we're here, home, together." Rebecca leaned back against Michael's chest, feeling the solid warmth of him, the reliability that had been the foundation of everything they had built. "Do you believe in fate? In the idea that some things are meant to happen?" "I believe in choice," Michael said thoughtfully. "I believe that life gives us opportunities, and what matters is whether we're brave enough to take them. You chose to trust me enough to get in that truck. I chose to offer help instead of walking away. Emma chose to embrace you as part of our family. Every step of the way, we could have made different choices that would have led to different outcomes. So not fate, but courage. Courage and maybe a little bit of grace. The grace to recognize a gift when it's offered, even if it doesn't look like what we expected." Emma appeared in the doorway, her hair sticking up in all directions and her favorite stuffed animal tucked under one arm. "Are you guys being all mushy again?" she asked with the long-suffering tone of a child who had learned to tolerate adult displays of affection. "Just a little bit," Rebecca said, opening her arms for a morning hug. "Come here, sleepyhead. We were just talking about how lucky we are." Emma snuggled between them, still warm from sleep and smelling like the lavender soap Rebecca had taught her to make from herbs grown in their own garden. "I know we're lucky," she said matter-of-factly. "Mrs. Patterson told me yesterday that most kids don't get to have 2 mums who both love them so much, and most dads don't get to have wives who make them laugh every single day." "Mrs. Patterson is a wise woman," Michael said, ruffling Emma's hair. "She also said that sometimes the best families are the ones you choose instead of the ones you're born into, and that love is more important than blood when it comes to deciding who belongs together." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes at the 8-year-old's matter-of-fact wisdom. "What do you think about that?" Emma shrugged. "I think she's right. I mean, I love my other mom because she gave me life and I'll always be grateful for that. But you're my real mom because you chose to love me and stay with me and teach me stuff and make me feel safe. That's more important than DNA." Over Emma's head, Michael and Rebecca shared a look of wonder at the clarity and generosity of spirit their daughter possessed. She had somehow managed to honor both her biological mother and her chosen mother without diminishing either relationship. To understand that love multiplied rather than divided when shared freely. "Besides," Emma continued, "if my other mom hadn't left, Daddy never would have learned how to be the best single dad in the world. And if he hadn't been the best single dad in the world, he wouldn't have been brave enough to help you when you needed it. And if he hadn't helped you, we never would have found this house and this life and each other. So really, everything that happened was necessary for us to end up exactly where we belong. Rebecca hugged Emma tighter, marveling at the wisdom that emerged from such a young person. You're absolutely right, sweetheart. Every single thing that happened, good and bad, led us to exactly where we were supposed to be. As they stood together in their kitchen, watching the day unfold over the water that had become their constant companion, all three of them understood that they had found something rarer and more valuable than financial security or professional success. They had found home in each other, purpose in their shared mission of creating beauty and welcome in the world, and the deep satisfaction that comes from building something meaningful together. The house around them hummed with the quiet contentment of a place where love lived, where strangers became family, where the past was honored and the future embraced with open arms. Eleanor Reynolds' cottage by the sea had indeed become everything she had dreamed it could be: a sanctuary, a gathering place, a launching pad for adventures both grand and small. And it all began with a cancelled flight, a stranger's tears, and one man's decision that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply show up for another human being. No questions asked, no rewards expected, just because it's the right thing to do. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.